I just want to thank everybody who has joined us. You're most welcome. I think this is our 6th seminar series, the NUI Galway Rural Studies Seminar Series. And we're running this, as we've said before, in conjunction with the Department of Rural and Community Development. So thanks a million to them for supporting us as we go along our journey. And we've had some really excellent seminars. And I suppose just to reiterate, the whole idea really with all of these seminars is to kind of have a look at the research that's being carried out in relation to rural areas right across Ireland and right across the higher institutes of Ireland, and to bring that research to the table, to people out in the general public, to bring it to other researchers, to bring it to participants on the ground, and anybody really involved in rural practitioners or rural areas. So that was our idea all along. So again, I suppose just in case I don't get time at the end, we will be finishing up this month, and we won't have any seminar in July and August, but we will be back again in September. So we'll be kicking off again with a new group of people in September. But for today, our seminar series, I'm absolutely delighted to have on board Dr. Bernadette Quinn and Samantha Morris. And Bernadette and Samantha are really looking at a lovely piece of research that they have carried out in the Technological University in Dublin. And this, I suppose, really, they have preliminary findings for us today, a phase 1 of an Irish Rural or an Irish Research Council funded research project related to festivals, audiences, and the digital experience. So the project investigates the implication of the digital turn for arts festivals in rural Ireland, asking have they the necessary capacity to avail of the opportunities that digital technologies undoubtedly offer for cultural production and dissemination. So Bernadette, Dr. Bernadette Quinn is a senior lecturer in the Technological University in Dublin, and she's a human geographer, very like the rest of us here on board in Galway, and she has a strong research interest in arts festivals, and her research has been widely published in geography and in urban studies, leisure and tourism journals, and she's currently the principal investigator on the HERA funded project on festival space and inclusion, and she's also the co-PI on the Irish Research Council's funded festivals, audiences and the digital experience. And Samantha Morris, who is also here alongside Bernadette, and Samantha is a senior research assistant in the Technological University in Dublin, and she's currently involved in the FTE project, this research project, and she's also currently undertaking a PhD investigating cultural mapping, place making and rural communities. So Samantha, we might have you back again in next semester to have a look at your own PhD work, maybe at that stage. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Bernadette and Samantha to tell us a little bit more about their really interesting project.
Thanks very much, Maura. Thank you very much for having us. We're delighted to be here. I suppose I'll start by sharing my screen, if I may. Now, here we go.
Again, I suppose while Bernadette is sharing her screen there, just to reiterate to everybody, please, put in any questions or comments that you might have into the chat during the presentation, which would be great.
Okay, great. Okay, so I hope everybody can see my screen. Yeah, all right. So I'm going to start making the presentation, and then I'm going to hand over to Samantha as we move along. And just apologies for my voice at the moment. I'm just a little bit not 100% because of COVID, but we'll do our best. So we're here this afternoon, and we're delighted to be able to introduce you to a project it's quite in the early stages yet, where we're interested in understanding the digital turn for arts festivals. It's a project funded under the Coalesce scheme by the Irish Research Council, and I just want to acknowledge my co-PI, Dr. Brian Vaughan from the School of Media in TU Dublin, who's not with us this afternoon, but who's 100% involved in this project as well from a media angle. So this is what we are about. We're trying to understand the implications of the digital turn for arts festivals, because as I imagine, even if you don't know very much about arts festivals, you'll know that the COVID-19 pandemic had a major impact on festivals and events, not just in Ireland, but everywhere. Because of course, what became outlawed during COVID was sociability and social encounters. It was, government regulations banned social engagement. And of course, sociability is absolutely the heart of festivity. So that represented a huge crisis for the sector. And in response to that crisis, then festivals began to look around and see, well, what could they do? And many of them increased their engagement in the digital sphere to try and keep engaging with people and to keep their festive activities ongoing. Now, this has been an enormous shift, and it could have potentially a great deal of implications for this area of creative practice. So that's what we're interested in studying. And we're particularly interested in understanding the experience in a rural context, because of course, there are particular challenges facing arts festivals in rural contexts that want to avail of digitisation opportunities. So we're coming, well, I certainly am coming from an arts festival studies background. I'm a geographer, but I've done most of my work on arts festivals. And so I'm hugely interested in arts festivals as a cultural and social practice. So the other new angle then for us is, how are they getting on in this digital environment? And one of the questions asked in this project is, what role can the National Broadband Plan play in developing infrastructures and supports that might help foster the development of this creative practice into the future? Samantha in particular will talk about the National Broadband Plan later on, and I'm sure some of you, perhaps all of you, know quite a bit about it. And if you do, you'll know it's talked about mainly in respect of remote working, facilitating remote working at the moment, because of course COVID brought about a lot of movement of people moving out of cities and being able to work from home. But from where we stand, we see huge potential for the National Broadband Plan to foster and facilitate cultural development as well. So that's what we want to look at a bit. But to start, my main aim in life this afternoon is to persuade you that rural festivals really, really matter. And I appreciate, as Maura said just in a little chat we were having before we went live, that this is a little bit of a niche. Not everybody is interested in festivals or researches festivals, but I've been studying festivals for, oh gosh, a long time, and I am just so passionate and so interested and committed to the idea that festivals are so important from a social, cultural, economic perspective. Most of the work in the literature, in social sciences literature, and I just stress as well, so, we're social scientists, we're not cultural experts. We're coming at this from a social sciences perspective. Most of the social sciences literature on festivals is actually done on urban areas. Huge amount of literature actually in geography, sociology, anthropology, cultural studies, urban studies. There's a smaller literature on rural festivals, but this particular literature on rural festivals has been on the rise in recent times. And what researchers write about and how they value rural festivals are on a number of bases. For example, rural festivals help people develop identities, not only collective identities as I have here, but also individual identities. They help foster social inclusion, social cohesion, cultural cohesion. They help in the development of cultural capital. They help foster local development, as one of your colleagues, Marie Mahan, has written about recently. Of course, and very obviously, they help generate tourism, but I'm always at pains to say they do much, much more than foster tourism. And it's really important that we conceive of festivals much more broadly than just in tourism terms, because they offer all kinds of potentials for developing the potential of rural places and in making rural places, fostering the vitality of rural places. They really do. Now, we don't have that much work done in an Irish context. And the images I have there is from some work that I did of a place that really has a long-standing festival. So Fecal in County Clare, tiny little village. I don't know how many people in the room would know Fecal, tiny little village, you know, and it has a long-standing festival that is of such importance to the place, socially, culturally, economically, in ways that go way beyond the few days in the year that the festival happens. So it's a small and it's a niche, but it's a profoundly important sector of activities, festivals in rural areas. Now, the Arts Council of Ireland would be a very important funder of arts festivals. And I suppose at this point we can say that in our study this time, we're really focusing on, I suppose, not the great big commercial festivals like Electric Picnic in the greenfield sites. We're more focused on those festivals that I suppose are in receipt of some sort of public funding. Most of those would be funded through the Arts Council, but also by, for example, local authorities, by Leader, and by various other, by Creative Ireland, directly from the departments, either tourism or culture. So they're the festivals that we're particularly interested in. Now, we have a map here that Samantha's put together. It's just 2022 data, and it shows us the location of the 138 small to medium festivals funded by the Arts Council of Ireland. And we could spend a half an hour on this map alone, because it tells a lot of stories. So we can see straight away a difference in distribution in the festivals that are funded. And we can see two blank counties, one of them of which is my own county. You know, there's lots to look at and to discuss and to try to ask, you know, well, why is this map as it is? A lot of you are based in Galway, and of course Galway is coming up a good, decent, dark colour there, which means that it is a vibrant centre of festival activity. Now, in addition to these small to medium festivals, there are about 37 other larger ones that are also funded by the Arts Council that are not captured in these graphics. So we're still quite an early stage of our projects and just putting material together. But one of the purposes of showing this today is to show you the extent of arts festivals. I mean, we find them everywhere. And while there are two counties there with no Arts Council funded festivals, I mean, I can tell you that there are festivals going on there. So for example, Mullingar in County Westmeath has the Fla coming up now very shortly, and excitement is at an all-time high. So during COVID, as I said, we saw this moment where digitisation of the sector was greatly accelerated. Now, it wasn't begun during COVID. So, for example, we can point to the very wonderful Galway International Arts Festival, for example, as a leading example of an Irish festival that has been engaging in digital production and dissemination for several years. And so I have an image there of John Gerard's Mirror Pavilion, which was commissioned for the City of Culture year long before COVID. And it just happened that it worked particularly well in the conditions laid down by COVID when it was put on public view. But throughout the rest of the festival population, we see festivals now looking to digital opportunities to try to keep going. And another prime example here was Court, another Galway city-based festival. It happens in April, and you'll remember that we went into lockdown in March 2020, and Court happened, you know, virtually immediately afterwards. And they were incredibly quick to really adjust and adapt and move digitally really, really quickly and very innovatively. We have a couple of images there. So they transformed their program delivery and taking advantage of digitization. So by having a reading club online and doing all kinds of things online that they hadn't done before. And we saw that in other places as well throughout the country. So, you know, in this project, we're less interested in the artist as such, although of course we are interested in the artist. We're more interested in the audience and in the people who live in places where festivals happen. And so from an audience reach and engagement perspective, then festivals were trying digitally to reach out, live streaming, broadcasting, podcasting, using all kinds of digital platforms. And of course, there's lots of opportunity there. But of course, there were tremendous difficulties and challenges. And many rural festivals in particular could not make the shift, like the bigger, better resourced, better connected, longer established festivals could, like the Go International Arts or like Corch. So here I just have up a couple of announcements from FECAL, for example, from West Cork, announcing their cancellation and their postponement. They hadn't the ability to move, they hadn't the resources. And that, of course, was not at all their fault. This is where we're at in terms of these small to medium-sized festivals, given their locations, given their resources. An awful lot of them are hugely dependent on voluntary input, for example. But they are underpinning all of that theory slide that I had earlier on. These are the festivals that are creating such value and vitality for rural life. So they're hugely important. Flacul, of course, cancelled as well. So there are lots and lots of challenges and uncertainties posed by digitisation. So in terms of methods then, what we have been doing so far, well, we have had at our disposal 2 secondary data sets in the first instance. So we have been working our way through those. So on the Arts Festival side, we have had a bank of minutes and notes from a series of conversations that the Arts Council of Ireland held with the festival population during 2020. So during 2020, the Arts Council of Ireland realised that festivals were in trouble. And as a way of responding to try and support the sector, it very quickly organised a series of what are called talking festivals series, where it brought together over a series of months, under different kinds of titles, groups of festivals to come and talk together as a way of building community, of sustaining the community, of sharing issues and problems, sharing knowledge and resources. And I think this was very well, as an aside, it was very well received by the festival sector, and it worked really well as a way of just engaging with the sector and supporting it through a moment of crisis. So that's the first data set we had, and we've been working through that, looking, thematically analysing what people have been saying. In addition, we've started doing in-depth interviews with various players in the sector, on the festival side and on the digital side, asking them about key issues, trying to identify what's going on, what are the key issues, key potentials, key challenges, all of that. In addition, back in March, at the Arts Council's biennial arts conference, we submitted a bid to curate a session, which was accepted, and we held a panel discussion on the arts and changing rural places. And we'll show you a little later on what came from that. So that's what we've been doing on the Arts Festival side. So in terms of analysing that secondary data set, we're still working our way through it, but we think that we might say that the findings can be sorted into 3 groupings. So firstly, we're seeing festivals talking about what we might call resourcing issues. And not unexpectedly, we're seeing multiple concerns expressed by festivals about the ability to work in digital contexts. And we're not going to go into detail about what those concerns are, but there are multiple concerns expressed by the bigger festivals, for example, around funding models. How do we develop new funding models? How do we ask people to pay? In the immediate moment of the crisis, very often material was put out into the public domain and no cost was asked of audiences. But really, that's not at all sustainable into the longer term, because of course there are still huge production costs. So those concerns went from that to, we just can't do it. We just don't have the knowledge. We don't have the skills, don't have the personnel. So a huge amount of concerns there. Secondly, of course, broadband access, just full stop. We have rural areas where digital broadband is, absent, unstable, unpredictable, and it's just not possible then to run an arts festival operation. So we definitely saw in 2020, and the Arts Council could see it and could hear it. And this is one of the reasons they engaged with the sector, was people told them they just didn't have the resources, they didn't have the technical know-how to move forward. And so the Arts Council responded then. So it has since recruited a digital officer, and it is offering funding to help arts festivals upskill themselves through their digital capacity building scheme. And so in 2021, we've seen what might be described as a reasonable percentage of festivals going to the Arts Council looking for funding to build their digital capacity, for example, to build a website, for example, or to resource aspects of programme delivery. So that's an enormous issue in the sector at the moment. Secondly, there's a cluster of issues around what we might describe as artistic concerns. So there was a lot of discussion in recent years, about festivals wondering whether a move to digital space is actually in alignment with their artistic vision or their artistic mission. I mean, here we're dealing with organizations that are very committed to a particular, well thought out, coherent artistic vision. I mean, they know precisely what they want to do, why they want to do it from an artistic perspective. And there's a lot of discussion around whether moving into digital space will accommodate their ability to remain true to that vision. We're definitely seeing and understanding that working in digital space suits some genre much better than it does other genre. So we're beginning to realize, and once we talk about the festivals and digitisation, we need to start breaking down festivals and explaining what we mean, not just in terms of size and scale resources, but in terms of genre. So for example, film, for example, or literature, they've seemed to have managed quite well and to be able to pivot and to engage with audiences and to still manage to get to work with audiences, as opposed to, for example, music, where the liveness of the performance has been so badly missed. So we're learning that the needs of artists and the needs of audiences vary. Thirdly, then, the third big cluster of issues might be called perhaps social issues. So much of the conversation was around this idea that festivals are premised on sociability, full stop. Social coming together, the human social encounter, this moment of celebration that every single festival is critical to understanding a festival. And if you can't do that, well, then what have you got? So there's been a lot of discussion about that. How can we maintain the sociability and the social connectivity as we move into the digital sphere? Now, of course, as people try to do it, and indeed as we are this precise moment doing it, we are actually showing that we can create sociability in digital space. And so as festivals have started to do this, they have been learning, that it is possible, although it's not replacing the real thing. And we'll come back to that again in a minute. But just a last point to make on this festival secondary data is that we're hearing from our engagement with the sector that it's really actually very early to be asking these questions. And so key informants are telling us, this year, 2022, the sector is not at all sure how people are going to act. It's not at all stable yet. Their data coming in, the signs of people's booking, their booking behavior, buying tickets is quite different to what it was pre-COVID. So they still think the thing hasn't settled down yet. So we're very early to be asking these questions. And a lot of festivals haven't made decisions about how to move forward because the situation is still very much unstable. And the Arts Council had said the same to us. I mean, we're going to tell you in our last slide that one of our next steps is to do a survey of the sector nationally. But we have been advised to hold off doing that until this festival season is over, until we see how it goes. Okay, so just I'm going to hand over to Samantha in a second. So these are our early learnings coming through on the one hand. And on the other hand, then we are wondering, well, what can the National Broadband Programme and the general digitisation, upskilling of the country that's ongoing at the moment do? Where's the intersectionality? So I'm going to hand you over to Samantha to talk us through the next few.
Okay, so the digital divide between rural and urban places across Ireland has long been accepted. You know, although mobile and low bandwidth services are available in most parts of the country, many areas still don't have access to high-speed broadband. So this means that households in these areas can't access services like live streaming or video conferencing. So to address the divide in broadband coverage, the Irish government launched the National Broadband Plan. And this is going to deliver high-speed broadband services to all premises in Ireland where commercial operators do not or have no plans to provide this service. So work commenced on the plan in 2020. And it's estimated that almost 95% of households will have access to high-speed broadband by 2025. The NBP, the National Broadband Plan, is the largest infrastructural project in rural Ireland since rural electrification, so it's absolutely huge. So the first step, I suppose, in the rollout plan was to identify those areas where the government needed to intervene. So where are these areas that had low quality broadband? So these areas are known as the intervention areas. And you can see them here in amber on this map. And the blue areas there on the map represent areas where you can get commercial broadband. So as you can see, it's a huge, vast area. And it actually includes 560,000 premises, 1.1 million people, over 54,000 farms, 44,000 non-farm businesses, and 679 schools. So it's an absolutely huge area. Next slide, please, Bernadette. So as part, no, back one. Thank you. As part of the National Broadband Plan, approximately 300 broadband connection points, or BCPs, will also be developed in specific areas across Ireland with poor or no broadband coverage. So you can see these on this map. Again, the green ones are the BCPs that are already connected, and the grey, the faint grey colour, they're the ones that are in planning. So broadband connection points are public locations which have been selected to receive high-speed connectivity in advance of the full deployment of the National Broadband Plan network. So as you can see, the sites are across 26 counties. So the locations selected by the local authorities and include public areas such as community halls, libraries, sports facilities. And these points will provide high-speed internet access, with many offering remote working capabilities as well. So it's expected to have about 300 BCPs live by the end of this year. Next slide, thank you. Another pre-existing or planned digital infrastructure providing high-speed broadband to rural areas are also the digital hubs. So ConnectedHubs.ie is an initiative under Our Rural Future, and it's managed by the Department of Rural and Community Development. So under this plan, individual digital hubs come together under a shared identity to maximise the economic opportunity of remote working. These hubs are mainly focused on remote working facilities. The whole project is being delivered by the Western Development, and there is about 230 hubs now live on the ConnectedHubs.ie platform, and you can see them there on the map. I may have actually seen Connected Hubs mentioned recently in the news because the government announced a series of new initiatives to support remote working. And they had a voucher scheme that'll give workers free access to local digital hubs. And that's all being done through the ConnectedHubs.ie platform. So the DRCD and the local authorities, then getting back to what the BCPs are doing. The DRCD and the local authorities are supporting the BCPs and help them to make best possible use of this facility, and to help them show the capability of the new high-speed connectivity. They're rolling out 4 thematic programs. So the 4 programs are e-health, remote working, education and training, and arts and culture. So eHealth is going to focus on online medical consultations, counselling, etc. Remote working is going to provide remote working facilities at these BCPs. Education and training is going to use digital connectivity for a range of training and education opportunities. And the arts and culture are going to be used as places for creativity and sharing skills. This can be anything from facilitating online arts groups to musical instruction or even film festivals. So at the moment, these programs are pilots and they're free to the public. And because of the nature of our topic, we're just going to be focusing on the arts and culture program. So how can the BCPs actually get involved in the arts and culture initiatives that are being run? Well, BCPs have access to a website called Connected Communities. And here the times and dates of upcoming events are all listed. And if a BCP is interested in hosting an event, they can register through this website. And then they're sent a link, which they just click to launch the event at their site. So I have here 3 examples of previous events which have taken place at BCPs. So the first one there is called the Oscar Collection. And it was an Irish Oscar nights hosted or compiled by the IFI, who compiled a collection of 6 family-friendly short films. They're all Irish films and they'd all been nominated for Academy Awards. It was compiled exclusively for the BCP audiences and they were all shown across one evening. The second one there is art classes with artist Una Latchford. Participants were taught painting techniques through the BCPs. And then there was also an event which was run with the visitor engagement team at IMA. They looked at the collection and the exhibitions and they discussed paintings with the audience members as well. And the audience members were also encouraged to talk among themselves about the art as well. So they're trying to get engagement with the arts. However, from interviews that we had with local authority digital officers, we found that there have been mixed attendances at these events. And especially there was a recent event, and I won't name the event, but this event took a long time to plan, a long time to produce and to put together, and there was a few partners involved in it. It was initially postponed in March due to low interest from BCPs, but it was rescheduled at the start of the summer, and BCPs were actually offered an added incentive of a €100 voucher for refreshments, which they could serve during the event. BCPs in 10 counties registered. Feedback from the BCP showed that the attendance levels at this event were very mixed, with some reporting an attendance of up to 25 people, while one BCP in particular actually had nobody show up, even though 15 people had registered, which was a very disappointing result for that BCP. And I suppose as part of our research, we want to investigate, like, what is the cause of this? Next slide, please, Bernadette. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the research we're doing in relation to BCPs. So at the moment, we're at the very early stages of collecting data. And we're collecting both primary data and we're looking at secondary data. So the primary data involves in-depth interviews with local authority digital officers. And we're also looking at secondary data from a survey of 93 BCPs, which the Department of Rural and Community Development carried out in 2021. This survey gauged the interest of BCPs in facilitating digital initiatives, and they asked the respondents about those 4 thematic themes. Again, e-health, remote working, education and training, arts and culture. And again, we're just examining the data related to the arts and culture programme. So I'm just going to share the results of 2 questions which were asked in the survey. So the first question here asks BCPs which type of in-person or online arts and culture classes they would be interested in facilitating. So respondents were given a list of art and culture activities. You can see the long list here. And they were asked to select all of which they would be interested in actually hosting. So you can see here, the most popular classes are dance, music, drawing, and painting, with the least popular being circus, street acts, book club, or book festival. However, film festival and festival again, you know, ranks in the middle there, so that's good from our side. The second question asked respondents which in-person or live stream performances the BCP will be interested in facilitating. So again, the respondents were asked to select all of the arts and culture activities that they would be interested in. And again, music and singing were very high. Again, festival, book festival and film festival here are really, really high. So there is a large interest, you know, there is a high interest there in actually hosting some festival events through BCPs. So I suppose the initial findings that show that the BCPs are interested in facilitating arts and cultural events. And in addition, like these are very early findings, but our early findings from our interviews with the local authority digital officers also show that there's an interest among BCPs to facilitate events, and that BCPs which have already hosted events want to host more events in the future. Okay, so I'm going to back to Bernadette.
Okay, so then I hope you can begin to see what we're trying to do. We're trying to find some intersectionality between these arts festivals and the issues that they're experiencing with trying to digitize and the provision of digital infrastructure. So what I've got here now is a graphic that we produced as a result of the conversation that we had as part of the Arts Council conference back in March, when we had a panel discussion featuring various people from the arts world, a county arts officer, an artist, and the director of an artistic centre, and the director of a arts centre. And then discussion from the floor, where we talked about the challenges and opportunities posed by digitisation. And as we can see here, people in the arts sector who work in rural areas are well able to identify challenges and opportunities posed by digitisation. So on the opportunity side, you know, we can see that the experience in the last couple of years is that going digital breaks down borders. You know, it opens up place, makes place more porous and more accessible. It increases the number of people who can engage. So it can grow an audience very much. It can open up a raft of previously unthought of ways for collaboration between artists and communities, between artists and artists, and there's tremendous potential there. From an arts perspective, you know, it means that the rural place as a place of creative practice now becomes more attractive, because artists can work in rural areas, but they can still remain connected with the external world. So they can give seminars, they can show exhibitions, they can show their work, they can beam in reviewers from New York and from their studio, you know, in County Galway. So the potential is tremendous. But of course, then there are difficulties. So while audiences are growing, you know, the question is though, I mean, what kind of audience is it? Is it the audience that you want actually to connect with? And that's back to the issue around, you know, what's your artistic mission? So more is not necessarily better. So that's a big issue. The broadband connectivity is uneven. So it's uneven across the country, as Samantha's maps have shown. And then socially and demographically, you know, there's a digital divide for sure. So county arts officers will tell you now that a lot of resourcing in the last couple of years has gone into upskilling people to be able to make sure that they know how to use Zoom, that they can access an iPad, etc. But of course, they didn't reach everybody. And as one of our arts officers told us, you know, now those people who have been left out, you know, are really left out. So we have this digital divide. For artists, for example, actually, artists have told us, you know, that the busyness of city life now can follow them very easily into rural, tranquil, supposedly tranquil places, because it's very hard to escape the connectivity now if you are connected digitally. And overall, everybody that we have spoken to says that you cannot beat in-person meetings, that sociability cannot be surpassed in digital space as in real space, in physical space. But we definitely think that while the picture that Samantha has showed is a very early development and rollout of broadband, especially from an arts and culture perspective, you know, it's so early, like it's hardly beginning, but surely the potential is there to tackle some of these issues. So just in summary, you know, we're definitely seeing many signs that festivals, including those in rural areas, and I suppose we should say that when we say rural areas, we mean anything that's not a city of 50,000 plus. So, you know, we're using the CSO 6-way classification of areas, and we're just going to exclude the very large cities. Now, at the moment, we're including them because as part of our key informants, it's very important, you know, that we talk to everybody, because clearly a lot of the really strong practice in digitisation is in the big cities. So it is Galway International Arts Festival, it is Dublin Fringe, it is those big festivals. So we are talking to all of those, but as we move into our closer, more in-depth work, we will not be in cities, we will be outside of cities. But we're seeing the adaptation of digitisation in ways that positively complements, not replaces, but positively complements in-person creative practices. But there's enormous uncertainties, unknowns, absences, lacks, voids, and challenges. And we're seeing that the digital infrastructure is really, really problematic. But there has to be potential. And I suppose, you know, one of the things that struck Samantha and I first when we started getting into this area and we started looking at policy documents, and this is really going into some people in the room's 40 here, you know, rural policy. So we started looking at rural policy for references to culture and the arts. And, you know, we weren't overwhelmed with the emphasis that we saw being placed on arts and culture in the rural policy document reading that we did. So, you know, we would like to think that as part of our work here, we would engage with policymakers to elevate the emphasis and the understanding, you know, that rural arts activities matter and they need support and they merit support from a whole series of perspectives. Now, having said that, we're getting in this project, we're getting tremendous support from Creative Ireland, the Arts Council and the Department of Rural and Community Development, which is absolutely wonderful. Here's a second graphic that we produced out of the discussions that we had at our Arts Council conversation. And it's making the point, is making lots of points, but the key point is, you know, that rural places create particular contexts for making art. You know, making art in a rural place is different to making art in a city. And we don't fully understand that or appreciate what that means. But that's what we talked about, and that's what some of the issues we've captured here. So what we heard people saying was, you know, community matters. People and community in rural areas matter hugely. And artists who work in rural areas have opportunities to engage with people in very kind of meaningful ways. And of course, people on the ground get a real opportunity through local primary schools, secondary schools, poetry readings, whatever, to engage with artists. So there's huge connections between artists and community. So one of our speakers came from Dara from Inisheer, and the Art Centre in Inisheer. Fascinating work going on out there at the moment in terms of digitisation and the thinking and reflection they did during COVID, how they're changing their thinking and now conceiving of the entire island as an art centre, as opposed to just the physical building, the art centre on the island. So it's absolutely fascinating to see what they're doing and how they're engaging. And, you know, tourism would be a big feature there in the summertime, but of course not in the winter time. But now they're, you know, rather than relying on tourists to physically come to the island, they're able to send their artwork out to where people are in their everyday places. Another huge thing that people talked about was the connectivity between the creative practice and the natural environment. You know, obviously the natural environment is so accessible through rural areas, and the tranquility that's still available through the residencies and the places of work available in rural areas. So I think we've a lot to do to fully understand and appreciate and you know, shout out for the fact that rural areas create particular contexts for making art. And then you throw into that then all of the mix. We need to also consider the fact, you know, rural areas are so dynamic. They're facing so many issues and challenges and opportunities at the moment. You know, last week, I'm sure you all read from top to bottom the CSO data coming out that shows, you know, that population in all counties have risen. And, you know, the fact that in-migration is a huge factor now in this population rise as opposed to natural change. And, you know, from our point of view, one of the big priorities we have in trying to understand what's going on is this notion of inclusion. We want, you know, rural art to be inclusive and open and a place of belonging and sharing, you know, for everybody. And increasingly now, everybody is looking very different than the everybody of old. And, you know, we have to move very quickly, you know, to adapt to that. So next steps. So this is what we plan to do next. So we're developing a survey where we're going to survey arts festivals nationally to get a better handle on the situation nationwide. On the basis of that then, and all the work we've been doing so far, we're going to identify 5 or 6 places for in-depth study. And those places will have at least one arts festival, but actually they'll probably have more than one. And they will also have a digital hub, a BCP, or possibly more than 1 or 2 of those. Because one of the key questions, as you hopefully now realize, is we want to see whether we can make one work for the other, you know, to everybody's mutual benefit. So once we go into those in-depth places for study, and we've got a new researcher joining us shortly, we're going to be really investigating in-depth festival practices and recent future planned experiences of working in digital space. And we're going to explore the current and the potential role that the national broadband infrastructure, but also digitisation more generally, can play in fostering continued vitality of rural arts festivals. And all the time we're going to keep shouting and encouraging people to recognise and acknowledge arts festivals and the value and the role that they play in rural places around the country. So, Gormagat.
Bernadette and Samantha, great. That was really interesting, really excellent. You know, taking us from a journey of the theory and the importance of building that social capital around festivals that can happen in small rural villages right up to larger rural towns. And I suppose moving through that idea of the BCPs and how they're connected with and how they can connect and everything from COVID. So some really interesting aspects in relation to this, Bernadette and Samantha. And I think issues that are very, very pertinent to rural areas as well. So I suppose with that thinking, I'm going to hand it over to the people who have connected with us today, and pretty quickly, in case anybody wants a question, and you can come on, I suppose, and ask the question or pop it into the chat, whichever is suitable. So we'll give everyone a minute. I think Shane actually has his hand up straight away there. Shane, who's with us here in the Rural Study Centre. So
yeah, Yeah, no, thanks a million. I really enjoyed that presentation, and it's something, it was pretty thought-provoking. I think there's a lot of things running through my head that even suggestions for you to look at, because I think there's one thing that could be incorporated in some way is the role of agricultural shows. Because in modern day countryside, they're a key feature of the rural calendar. And, in recent years, these have been expanded, not just to look at livestock, for example, but they serve a greater public good in rural society and trying to engage rural and urban, showcasing different cultural aspects, be it demonstrations or Irish dancing, etc., etc. So they have a very important role to play in rural society, but they're kind of unexplored. And I think under this project, I think there could be great potential. That's why I just really enjoyed that presentation. So it's a compliment more than anything, and maybe a question as well, somewhere in between.
Great,
Shane. Thanks, Shane. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm somebody who grew up with agricultural shows and have many prize for making all kinds of artistic, decorated vegetable and all kinds of and I'm sure the art dimensions. Shane, then are you saying, have agricultural shows now branched out such that they might have cultural programs more than they would have in the past?
Yeah, most certainly. They've definitely extended their reach, and even their locations are slightly near urban centres now. I was at one recently in Athlone, and there was Irish dancing taking place, there was demonstrations, and as you said, the rural fabric was on display in that, be it various flower arrangements or cooking demonstrations. There was music. So I don't know, it just struck a chord when you were speaking. I was like, this is a really important project, and I suppose because my research is in farming, it'd be nice to incorporate that in a way, in some way or another as well. So
no, I appreciate you saying that. Maybe we might have a conversation at some point about that.
Okay.
About how we might maybe think about bringing that in a bit. No, yeah. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Shane. I might bring in Aisling and Louise if there's anything they want to pick up on via the chat or themselves.
Yeah, we have one comment from Amy Lawless. I don't know if Amy wants to come in herself. It's just related to Culture Night and how a lot of the applications for events are in person at the moment, and that online events perhaps need to be incentivized. I don't know if Amy wants to.
I think Amy, from what I know, Amy, I think is the arts officer in Galway County Council. Amy, if you want to pop in there, you're more than welcome. And if not, just to have, yes, Amy is there with us.
I just realised my headphone isn't down. Hi, no, just the point that with Culture Night, it's because the past few years it's been really exciting to see a lot of really interesting online events and that audience development work that's been happening over the past couple of years. But it seems to me that people are really reverting back to in person. And in one way, as I understand it, because there's a fizz and an energy about being in a space with people again. But at the same time, we're leaving audiences behind who actually can't physically be in spaces. In particular, people who are, for medical reasons, are still having to shield and cocoon. We're just quite conscious of not leaving people behind and about supporting the Arts Council's goal for Culture Night, which is one night for all. So it might be something that we need to think about, actively trying to encourage people and put funding support in place for people to provide digital online content, even for festivals and for events like large-scale events like Culture Night. That's all. It's just a comment, really.
Great, Amy. Thanks a million. And it's good to see that as well. The Culture Night's coming back in. I think Timothy there, unless Louise and Aisling have something else there, but I think Timothy.
How's it going? Sorry, just very quick comments. Really like the presentation. I love the graphics, especially. I suppose I had some designing stuff back in my previous career, but anyway, thought that was really, really good. Just in terms of my experience, I worked for the National Broadband Plan, and I currently work for DRCD on the BCPs. I do agree with the next steps that you've listed, Bernadette, and certainly I think we'll be talking very closely in the near future on some of the events. Just what Amy had mentioned there as well, for kind of the in-person events, we are kind of pushing some of the events at the moment to be in person, but still having kind of the hybrid model there so that people can join in online. And it's very delicate balance. And I think it just depends on what capacity people have at, say, BCPs. Some BCPs are certainly bigger and better than others. And it just depends on what sort of equipment and setup they have, so that can be inclusive to all audiences. That's it.
Laura, can I come in there?
Yeah, absolutely, Bernadette, please.
Just to respond to both of those. Thanks a million, Timothy. Yeah, and Amy, Amy, I'm not surprised to hear you say that, because to be absolutely honest, so we applied for funding for this project and we got it and we were absolutely delighted. And then we began to talk to some people and saying, oh God, no, there's going to be no more digital events. As soon as this thing is over, we're going to be back in person. We were going, oh my goodness. But we picked ourselves up, and as we began to talk to people in depth though, we realized, no, they're not throwing away the digital, because they can't. I mean, there's been such learning. Huge amount of learning has gone on and investment. So I think it's we're still in this kind of interim period. It'll shake on down in time. And as Timothy, as you say, there's differential abilities and capacities. But I think the hybrid, somewhere in the middle is the way forward. I think. And I think, some of the people we're talking to, that's what they're telling us. There's a place for this and there's a place for that. Depends on the genre, depends on the motives. So thank you both. And we'd like to talk to both of you, actually.
Great.
Would that be all right?
Some good connections made there, Bernadette. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to come in before we have to finish up. Aisling is back in there.
It's okay, it's Louise.
Louise.
That's okay. Thank you. I think it's so exciting for a rural, like Shane said, everything's just like popping candy in my head, so many potential behind this. I guess I have a couple of questions. Well, my main one is, sometimes I liked that you were dividing what you thought about the different types of festivals, that you're talking in language of terms of genres and maybe typologies, because sometimes that is just, the language is so broad that little rural communities don't identify themselves in it. So I think that's a space that you can unpack and see what comes of that. I think in relation to what Timothy was saying and yourself was saying, you mentioned policy at the outset, and as you rightly said, all the rest of us perked up and said, oh, we know policy. Sometimes you can't get that shift without the policy backing. And unless you have policy, you won't get the funding. And it might die away. People will go back to the norm because the structures aren't in place. And I like that you mentioned about having new funding systems. But I think maybe a niche may be that you identify the importance of culture. Like we think of the three strings or bows of sustainability, but actually cultural development is integral to creating those social spaces for integration, for social capital, for everything else that gets discussed. But it just doesn't have that tagline of cultural development, which actually underpins a lot of this. And one of my questions is this: I'm in a small rural community, maybe like many here, and when we think of our rural festivals, we don't think in terms of the Galway International Festivals. We don't have those big, it's usually a homegrown festival. And those things are built on this idea of community, or the economy is getting something back from it. So I think, I know you're only at the beginning of it, and these are millions of questions I have, but how will the digital rural festivals give back to that community? So I'm thinking here in my community, really small, the fair, something like Shane suggested there, where there is baking, but then the people are going into the tiny restaurants, the coffee shops, and they feel that they get the tiny group of people that are leading it. So if they don't get something back, how do you get those local people, the grassroots people, to get involved in those rural festivals? I know there's different types, but typically I think the rural ones are homegrown. Thank you.
Well, see, Louise, I don't think it's going to be an either or. So I think what the digital is going to do is going to allow even a small festival to make more, to give a digital life to the physical activity that they're having. It's going to be like that. I mean, we've already encountered issues. City councils, county councils want to fund festivals for economic reasons. We know that, or for reputational branding reasons. And we've already, we have a couple of examples in festivals in Dublin, for example, who didn't get funding anymore in 21. They got it in 2020, but not 2021, because it just wasn't delivering on what City Council wanted, which is kind of what you were talking about there. But I think going forward, we're going to find these hybrid ways of working. where you will have the person coming in, but maybe you'll have, you know, that concert will be then recorded and it will have an afterlife. Or there will be, you know, an augmented reality dimension. So it's going to be new and different ways of making festivals work to meet your concerns, which are absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
Fundamental.
I think your research will be really integral to helping them do that. I think it's so exciting. So we'll be watching your space. It's brilliant.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Louise, for that. And thanks, Bernadette. And I suppose it aligns with the comment, we have a comment in there as well from Deirdre McDermott. And absolutely that idea that we may have to accept that, you know, physical events have a carbon footprint attached to them and can impact, I suppose, climate change. So we have to keep all of those things into our consideration as well. I suppose we're sticking fairly tightly always to the time. So it's just coming up, or it's just after that 4 o'clock mark. So we might call a halt, even though I'm sure there's many more comments and questions that could be asked. But I particularly want to thank Bernadette and Samantha, are really enlightening. You know, sometimes we kind of suggest that these areas of research are niche areas, but actually when you look at what Deirdre and Bernadette, Samantha and Bernadette have talked about, like, they're not really niche areas, they're exactly what we're doing in rural areas, and building that social capital through the arts, through festivals, is exactly what we all attempt and hope to do. So I think it is definitely pertinent in relation to all of the work that we do ourselves in rural areas, rural development, rural sustainability as well. So definitely thanks a million, Bernadette and Samantha. And as Louise has said, we will definitely follow your research with interest along the way. Just before we finish, I suppose I just want to thank again the Department of Rural and Community Development for supporting us in these NUI Galway Rural Studies Seminar Series that we started last January, and we're taking a break now for July and August, but we will be back again in September with a host of new people bringing their research that is relevant to rural areas and to rural Ireland. And I suppose in relation to that, I want to particularly thank I suppose Shane Conway, who does a huge amount of the work in the background, from the graphics to organising some of the days and the events and the links and everything. So sincere thanks to Shane. I want to give a big thanks to Louise and to Aisling, who have been on all of the seminars and have fed back some of the questions and some of the comments. So I suppose without those people in rural studies, we wouldn't have continued with the seminar series. So sincere thanks to all of those. And again, we will, I suppose it'd be nice if we could maybe in advance of a lot of the seminars, maybe next year, that we will have a list of those coming. So I suppose keep an eye on the space come in early September, and we will start to advertise the new research that's coming in from September onwards. So again, thanks a million to you all, but particularly to Bernadette and to Samantha. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining in as well. It's greatly appreciated that you took the time to join us.